Here we're with Christopher Allen. He is sort of a world expert on decentralized identities. And here at the Exodus, one of the key principles of the Exodus Phone is for users to own their own identity. And really just wanted to get your thoughts on, what DID is, what does it mean to own your own identity, what is the technology, the background, how you got interested in this. And then we can get into the more philosophical things, because just this past weekend I read this fascinating article on identity. I would love to get your thoughts on that. But yeah, just to start with, introduce yourself, your background, how you got into this whole space.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, my name is Christopher Allen. I'm probably best known as being the co-author of the SSL TLS standard, which secures trillions of dollars of e-commerce. It's what is the S in HTTPS. So I got on the track of doing that in some measures. I mean, we weren't really calling it decentralization then, but trying to remove or at least balance the powers of big parties. When SSL was coming out, we had entrenched parties like Visa and MasterCard who said, oh, we want to own e-commerce on the internet. Everybody has to pay us a toll to do anything with e-commerce on the internet. Microsoft had this sort of embrace and extend thing that they very typically do. They had their own kind of SSL-ish thing that they wanted to do. What I wanted to do was enable entrepreneurs, organizations, private parties to be able to use security. So all the other people were kind of focused on how do we allow the future of e-commerce. They had in mind the Amazons. Of course, there were a few pet.coms in there. But that's what their mind was. Whereas I was very much more along the lines of I wanted people to be able to set up and publish a blog, which didn't exist then, or any one of a variety of other different kinds of things. So it was designed to work for everybody. One of my peers was John Callis. He was the co-founder of PGP, and I helped him with some things. And about 4 years ago, I was kind of at a party with him and jokingly ragging him on how much of the internet is secured by PGP. And
nothing.
Yeah, unmeasurably low. And the reason why was this is 4 years ago. The numbers are higher now. Google basically announced that 60% of all outgoing email and 50% of all incoming email is secured by SSL TLS, which was not what it was designed for. In fact, I almost lost my role as the IETF editor for TLS because I had reserved these ports for IMAP-S and FTP-S and IRC-S, etc., because SSL TLS could be used for more than just the web. And people were going, oh no, you're not chartered to do that. And but it ended up being very good that I did. But it struck this conversation about all these things that PGP did that never were good ideas, but never made it. Right now, PGP still exists largely in the area of software development to be able to sign files. So you'll find people will tell you when you download a binary of Bitcoin, check it against the digital signatures of that binary to make sure that nobody's modified it. But using it for mail, using it for regular business commerce, largely not used. Use it to talk to Snowden, yes, but not to your grandma. So basically, I set a challenge to the community of can we reboot the Web of Trust, because that's what the model was.
So you've been thinking about security as an architecture from day one.
Oh yes.
Right. And so at what point, I guess, did it, go on its own tangent or go wrong for you to start this Web of Trust, rebooting the Web?
Well, I think part of it was that a lot of the solutions were difficult or were subject to other forms of centralization. I mean, if we think about, we get a lot of criticism today as a OG in this territory, about the browser companies own the root keys and all this type of stuff. They control stuff. It's so centralized there. But I also, if you look at the people that were working with me, we were trying to prevent the centralization around financial powerhouses like Visa and MasterCard.
Yeah.
So in our own ways, we were trying to do things. When certificates first came out, the idea was you choose what certificate hierarchy you wish to use. You want to use VeriSign, and with its higher level of criteria, but also not particularly friendly to human rights organizations and responds to court requests, in my opinion, too quickly. Or you can use somebody like Thought or one of the other companies that have more lax requirements that would be fine for a commerce website or for a human rights website or whatever. Well, what ended up happening was those all got consolidated. VeriSign bought most of them, and then VeriSign got bought, and RSA got bought, and we had a new form of centralization.
And centralization in this case is fundamentally not safe.
Correct.
Right.
As an example of some of the things that happened to personal friends of mine, one of my friends is an advertising agent in his day life, but he has an anonymous identity where he talks about hate speech in radio. So he would basically put little clips of, here is what this radio host said, that was hate speech about blacks or whatever. But because he's in the advertising business, he knows that if he knows trying to go against the speakers doesn't work. So he would list, here are the advertisers on either side of this hate speech.
Oh, interesting.
And here's the telephone numbers. And he had to do this anonymously because he is in the advertising agency, in the advertising world. He doesn't want his business to be banned because he's trying to do a good deed. The company was Clear Channel, which was owned by Disney, and he basically had a takedown notice. Somebody basically said, "Oh, you're distributing our copyrighted materials when you're doing these things."
Yeah.
Except for the Constitution says explicitly that this is fair use when you're talking about commentary and such. So I helped him connect with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and they were able to deal with some of the domain stuff because they also tried to take his domain away, and ultimately he was able to recover. But he wouldn't have been if he was just a
But he lost his
regular
identity. He's no longer anonymous, right? So he's smoked out essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the end, but we tried to protect him as long as we could. I have another student who worked in Afghanistan when the cell phones were being brought in after the war, and I met her in
Sounds like you, man.
in an MBA program. I taught her in my MBA program, and what she started doing was teaching women how to be entrepreneurs in Afghanistan. So, among other things, at the time I was working with BlackPhone. Gave her a bunch of 1-year passes to free cell phone secure voice over IP, equivalent of Signal. So that her clients, the people that she was teaching how to be entrepreneurs, could basically communicate outward, because clearly the Five Eyes are keeping a tight look on Afghanistan. So I've been involved in these types of activities for a long time. A lot of things we haven't been able to solve up until the blockchain came along. Some people say blockchain allows us to square Zuko's triangle. I'm not sure that's an accurate statement. There's still issues, but it does allow us to do some things that were not practical or economical before. So. Rebooting Web of Trust started 3 years ago. I had Vitalik there. I had luminaries from Bitcoin Core. I even had as a sort of anonymous person there, the CTO of a major domain name company.
Just came to listen, huh?
Yep. Well, he was fearful about being outed as being, part of the problem. And I very much respected that he was willing to come in for that. purpose.
Yeah.
But he could give us perspectives on things that we were missing, scaling issues, other different types of things that they have a much longer history of dealing with that we're ultimately going to have to solve too.
Yeah.
So we wrote our first major white paper on decentralized public key infrastructure, and then we've had an event every 6 months since, and we've slowly created requirements for public key infrastructure that is decentralized. Ultimately, one of the key things was this concept called a DID, and something called a verifiable credential. So both of those are now moved sort of out of rebooting Web of Trust and are in the W3C process to move forward as standards.
So this weekend, I don't know if you read this book. I mean, this article was published on The Guardian. It says, "Can we choose our own identities?"
I haven't read that specific one.
It's by this.
Referring to Caitlyn Jenner in particular,
Yes.
which is interesting.
Well, it's not just about Caitlyn Jenner. He's the scholar. His name is Kwame Appiah. He's a philosopher from Ghana, and he just talks about race. And I think at the end of the day, he says, identity is a matter of negotiation. You can bid for the identity that you want, and it is up to others whether or not they recognize that identity as yours. I mean, I see that as maybe true as a statement of fact, but it's not really a moral compass kind of. How do you think about identity? Like, what about blockchain made identity like what you said? Like, what was it about blockchain that sort of unlocked this potential?
Well, a lot of it is in the area that we can now break apart some of these different pieces. If you look at classical identity systems, the identifiers, the authentication that the party who is holding those identifiers has is authorized. Is authenticated, to be the person that his credentials being issued on. The authorization of what is being allowed, given that authentication, have all been terribly entangled, and we've several times tried to untangle them apart for them only to fall back again. The classic example, I used to work at Blockstream. Adam Back, cypherpunk, long time history of being involved in the movement. Not a particular fan of Facebook. He has an account on there because sometimes he needs to. Well, during the controversies last year, somebody basically started posing as him on Facebook, saying, I'm Adam Back, and I like these new mining proposals and all these other different things, which were false.
Yeah.
So Adam basically went and said, hey, somebody's impersonating me, and only to end up having his own account get banned.
Wow.
And it was only because, we're in Silicon Valley, and we knew somebody who knew somebody at Facebook who was able to solve this problem. But how's a regular person do this? Yeah. There are people who rely on Twitter or Facebook or some other identifier that's been given them by a third party for their business, their livelihood, all their family relationships, etc. So separating out things so that when one thing is being challenged, that not everything is being challenged. Another example was a company that I'm involved in had a bunch of different Google accounts, and one of the Google accounts got compromised in some fashion, but they basically shut down all of our Google accounts, which also shut down all of our AdWords, which also shut down every single other service that we had.
Yeah.
There's no phone number you can call. There's so basically, because of the compromise of a single address, they basically compromised the whole domain or turned off the whole domain. We want to stop that type of thing. If we talk about the kind of credit card mass attacks where we've had millions of records be stolen, or similar types of things have happened in India with millions of records, we really want to make it such that there aren't large honeypots of data that one person can break through, make a mistake, but immediately go in and harvest millions. If we make it such that they basically have to go to that level effort for you, and again that level effort for you, et cetera, we're making it a lot harder for everybody. So that is what a decentralized identifier does. It says at the bottom level, there's this point where I should have control over my underlying identifiers. That doesn't mean that I can say I drive a car. It doesn't mean that I can say I have a PhD in quantum physics. That's not what self-sovereign identity is about. But it does mean that I can speak to you as a peer when you say, hey, I'm willing to certify a credential that says yes, you graduated with a PhD in quantum mechanics. It's a very different negotiation than this kind of please, can you please type of thing.
Chris, can you just clarify, because I struggle with this for a bit, identifiers, identity, authentication, and then authorization, and then in sort of the context, if you will, of sovereignty. Right, which is this backstory that I think Phil would love to get into.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk
technical
about that because it's one thing we can do these architectures. And architectures, I think are beginning to prove themselves as being valid and solve some problems, but their underlying choices come more from a cultural and I hate to say quasi, but political side of
small p politics, right?
So specific on the tech.
Just get those clear because I think everybody gets confused.
So let's take one of the simplest ones, which is the BTCR DID. So this is one that uses the Bitcoin blockchain, so leverages the Bitcoin blockchain. There are others. Uport leverages Ethereum. There are others that use a Bitcoin blockchain, like Blockstack. There's a whole ecosystem of different companies that are doing those. BTCR is a very simple one. It's designed to just be kind of a reference to show what's possible. So all of us who've had Bitcoin for some period of time have a trail of history. Transactions that may or may not be attributed to us, may not be correlatable to us. And often we have something called dust. These are the small change that the wallets weren't able to quite deal with. You can basically take any old transaction, and in many ways the best ones are these old dust transactions, and you can turn that into a DID. So what does that mean? That means that at some point in the past there was a key that you're never supposed to use again, at least for money. And there is another key, which has never been revealed, that has some funds on it, but it might be a few Satoshi or some fraction, such that it's not worth trying to consolidate it and spend it. Okay, that is enough for me to be able to bootstrap a very elaborate identity for you.
Okay, so it's like the first identifier, like Genesis identifier.
Yeah, and in some ways it's. I mean, I hate to overuse the word blockchain, but in some way it is kind of a personal blockchain. So once you are willing to reuse that key that you had spent, which is public on the blockchain, that means for you to be able to go, is that key valid? Is that the key that Christopher says that he has from 2010? You can basically just go to the blockchain, go to any Explorer, do SPV, do the new formats, and go, yes, that key actually did exist in 2010. Now, how valuable that is by itself, not a lot, and that's actually deliberate because you want to potentially have lots of these that you might use for different purposes.
So in the Adam Back problem of Facebook, how would this solve that?
Right. So basically, what in a Facebook scenario or a social network scenario, somebody comes in with a DID, any one of the number of DIDs. They go to Facebook, and Facebook, instead of authenticating them themselves, having a password, And keeping all of that private information about you, your birthday, your mother's maiden name, your first pet, etc. Instead, what they do is they authenticate your DID, which can be a very strong cryptographic public key operation. Then they can, given that and other things that you present to them, they can go, yes, you are now authorized to use the Facebook service, but you could use that DID with Twitter, and they could say, yes, you meet all the requirements to be able to be authorized to use our service. In this particular case, if Facebook basically says, we're going to basically no longer allow you to use our service, it's not going to stop Twitter. Right now, anybody who uses these multi-log-on type services, single sign-on type whatever that root service is, you're at the mercy of that root service.
So in that case, when somebody else comes with the fake Adirondack DID, it's very easy to authenticate that this is not the real.
Exactly. And it has, because of at least in the Bitcoin blockchain, you have a long history. I can prove it that it's it was established on August 8th, 2015 or whatever date you want to use for your first thing, and if you wish, you can basically leave other breadcrumbs along the way of other transactions that allow you to say, hey, there's a history behind this, it's real, it's valid, and it's now worth something. So you want the first DIDs to be worthless for a variety of just incentive reasons. You want them not to be censored, etc. As these become more valuable, you can basically upgrade them, put more information on them. So
we have to go now.
Let's go.
We'll continue our conversation after.
Okay.
But we should.
Cool.
And I'd love to talk about the political, social
Yeah, we will.
side. Why?
We do too. That's